Hello and welcome to History You Need to Know. Today our question is, what was the Wilmington Massacre? In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city, and it had a majority black population. In Wilmington, there were successful black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, and black elected officials. Now that meant that Wilmington had a government that shared power between black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Now, this was something that the Democratic Party, which at that time was the party of segregation and white supremacy, was simply not going to accept. So, Democratic Party leaders came up with a plan to get back into power. The state's Democratic Party handbook from 1898 laid out their goal, and the goal was to consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. They also played up another fear. Black men threatening white women became a theme. This was all part of North Carolina's Democratic strategy. A prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said, "If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch." Her speech prompted a Wilmington black man named Alex Manley, owner of the black-run Daily Record newspaper, to respond with a column of his own. He made a very simple observation that at that time was both shocking and very bold. He asserted that white women who had relationships with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically. Now, Manley's editorial further infuriated the white Democrats and exacerbated an already volatile situation. It was just a few months before the election, and white voters were very angry. By the time the election rolled around on November 8th, black voters had been thoroughly intimidated by a Democratic Party paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. They attacked and blocked black residents from voting. Well, the votes were counted, and since black didn't vote because of voter suppression tactics used by the Red Shirts, the Democratic candidates won, but some local politicians remained in power because their seats had not come up for re-election. Now, like the white Republican mayor and the board of aldermen, which consisted of some black elected officials. And we must remember that the election did nothing to undo the economic power of black people held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacy and control remained out of reach. So they engineered what was essentially a coup to overthrow the democratically elected government. Now, the day after the election, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. It said, and I quote, "We will no longer be ruled or will ever again be ruled by men of African origin. And as for Alex Manley, the owner of the black newspaper, we demand that he leave the city forever within 24 hours." End of quote. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manley was gone. He had fled to save his life. They set fire to the Daily Record, and at City Hall, the mayor and the board of aldermen were forced out. So essentially, this mob overthrew a democratically elected government. It didn't matter that these people were voted into office. Since they didn't like it, they wanted to change it, so they did. There were 200 armed men in City Hall at the time, and as they resigned, new members were elected by the Democratic Party, and they were voted in. Now, meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and violence spilled into the streets, and there were up to 60, some say 60 to 100 people who were massacred that day. As a result of the violence, many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city. Thousands of residents fled Wilmington, never to return. The city never regained its black majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented blacks from voting were immediately enacted, and Wilmington's spirit of black opportunity was crushed. In closing, I want to say that the primary job at that time was to suppress the black vote. They knew then what many people don't know now. The way to stifle black progress is to keep black people away from the ballot box. This is why voting is so important. By way of your vote, you can elect people who will fight to protect your rights and enact and enforce policy that is protective and progressive. God bless you and have a good day. Also, I want to give a shout out to Vox for their research on this documentary.